Hi, I'm Skinny Cheeks. In this video, I'll be catching you up on the important changes for Update 47. I'll cover new stuff being added, the balance adjustments, and then end the video by talking about how builds from Update 46 will be affected and what you can do to adjust. Let's go ahead and jump right into it. First up, there are two new dungeons, Clattuc and Black Gem Foundry. I've done the hard modes for both of these on the PTS, and as always, the dungeon team did an amazing job. Some really cool mechanics and aesthetics for both of these. Some nice new cosmetics available from these as well, including a new skin and an orange skill style for weakness to elements in the destruction line, and also white for fire rune in the mages guild line. As usual, there will be 8 new item sets coming from the new dungeons as well. I'll cover a few that seemed interesting to me. The first is Black Gem Monstrosity from Black Gem Foundry. While in combat, casting a soul magic ability consumes a soul gem and gives you a black gem splitter for 10 seconds. This effect can occur once every 6 seconds. Dealing light or heavy attack damage, fires the black gem splitter at your target, dealing 17.1% of your target's max health as magic damage, up to 17,100 magic damage. For builds using Wield Soul as their spammable, this is actually a really strong option for damage from a monster set. It doesn't scale with your weapon and spell damage, and so it is comparatively stronger than your traditional DPS monster sets like Selene by a higher percent the lower your weapon and spell damage is. It can crit, and it scales with other percent boosts like a normal proc set would. It just doesn't scale with the weapon and spell damage. So for example, at just 1k weapon and spell damage, it's about 10 times stronger than Selene, but even up to 8k weapon and spell damage, it still hits about 26% harder than Selene does. After about 10k though, that's when Selene will pass it up again. The main downside to this set is that you have to use Wield Soul as your spammable if you want to trigger this on cooldown, which is generally one of the weakest options in that category. So I think the monster set is pretty well designed to help augment that playstyle. So overall, I wouldn't swap to Wield Soul just to use this set, but if you have a thematic style build that is already using that spammable, this can definitely help make up some of that difference, and it is worth noting that this does trigger from range as well. Next up, we have the heavy armor set in Clattuc, Stone Hulk Domination. This one looks pretty good. When you taunt an enemy, apply major vulnerability to them, increasing their damage taken by 10% for 12 seconds. This effect can occur once every 15 seconds. So this is kind of similar to Turning Tide, except it's single target only, but it offers a slightly higher uptime at 80% instead of 66%. This is definitely a solid one to pick up for single target boss fights. Then finally from Clattuc, the light set Zanmir Spellweaver. Increase your damage done with flame, frost, and shock damage by 5%. Increase your damage done with burning, chilled, and concussion by an additional 15%. I don't think this one is actually very good. I'm mostly mentioning it because it's a cool idea and a missed opportunity to help boost the Elementalist playstyle. Currently, that sort of build is pretty far behind what other options can do. This set could have been a nice way to help even that out, but sadly, even on an Elementalist build, this will only be decent for damage, not one of the top options. Unfortunately, ZOS has a track record of stuff like this, where sets designed for a very specific playstyle are not even the best options for that playstyle, not to mention the opportunity cost you already take to use that playstyle, so a set like this should be far, far stronger to help make up the gap there. Doesn't make a lot of sense to me, but I thought I'd mention this one. I hope it can get a little more love at some point. There are also some new PvP sets added. Not really my area of expertise. Y'all let me know down below if you think some of these seem interesting to you. Next up, we have some quality of life and other miscellaneous additions. So survey reports that you get from crafting writs will now drop in a blue unidentified survey report container. So these will stack and are tradable. Once you open the container and receive the survey from it, then it will be bound, but you are free to sell or trade before that. Pretty awesome change for the game. Those that don't want to collect can just sell them and someone else can collect them. It seems as though the prices will likely work out to where these would sell for a little bit lower than what the average materials you'd gain from them would sell for. So a way to get cheaper mats for those that don't mind collecting them. I'm a big fan of this change. Next, we have rerolls now in the Infinite Archive for our visions. The cost escalates each time the reroll option is used per vision choice, resetting when a new vision selection opportunity is presented. The first reroll costs 500 fortunes, and then it starts with an 8 times multiplier and jumps up to 4,000 for your next reroll. Can't remember the specifics from there, but I think it jumped up to a 7 times multiplier after that to 28k. Apologies, I don't remember the exact number, but it was something crazy like that. So I'll probably only ever attempt one reroll with the current iteration, but I can see how they wouldn't want it to be just too easy to keep rerolling until you get what you want. Another feature they've added in now is mount swimming. This is actually pretty awesome. Any mount you own can swim now, and this greatly increases the speed that you can move through the water. No more getting dismounted when you hit a pool of water that's too deep. And then like usual with new updates, there will be a couple of new homes added as well as a ton of new furnishings. Next up, we have the combat balance changes. There were quite a few changes and then reverts over the course of the PTS, so I won't cover the stuff that didn't end up going through. Instead, I'll walk us through the most relevant changes and where we ended up as of the final changes on the PTS. So starting with class abilities from Assassination, Grim Focus, and its morphs no longer give the stacks of weapon and spell damage. This is one of the biggest nerfs of the patch, and most builds will lose quite a bit of damage from this one, especially those just using Relentless Focus on their back bar for the passive 400 weapon and spell damage. They did change that morph to only need 4 stacks to fire now, so you can actually fire 3 bow procs in a row with the Relentless Focus morph now. Seems like this may be the slightly stronger PvE morph now, whereas Merciless Resolve still hits harder, so that might be slightly better for areas of the game where burst is prioritized. Either way, they're both great. You can probably just choose the one that fits your sustain needs better. Now, in place of that lost weapon and spell damage, they added in Major Prophecy and Savagery for slotting it on either bar, so this will definitely help out in some scenarios that you're trying to figure out how you want to source this buff. For example, if you were running Prophecy and Savagery on your banner, you could now change that to one of the other buffs that it offers. All right, next up in the Shadow skill line, we have Shadowy Disguise and Dark Cloak. So Shadowy Disguise now gets minor protection on both bars for slotting instead of the Major Prophecy and Savagery. So this one is the same as Dark Cloak now for the buff. I definitely like to see the duration increased on the Born from Shadows buff on Shadowy Disguise. Right now it's just 10 seconds. I think with how far behind Shadow is, they could definitely bump that up. And then Dark Cloak has been changed to heal for its extra amount when you're bracing instead of when you're standing still. They also nerfed the duration of it from 5 seconds down to 3 seconds. I really don't understand why they nerfed that duration here. It wasn't overpowered. It's a really weird change to a skill line that was already underperforming. And really, I'm just disappointed to see no buffs to one of the worst performing lines in the game right now. They could have easily moved that 400 weapon and spell damage loss from Assassination over to this line, and it still wouldn't be one of the best lines. So hopefully there's some more stuff on the way in the future for the Shadow line. For the Sorcerer in the Daedric Summoning line, we have some changes to Bound Aegis and armaments. The max magicka and stamina these used to offer has been removed. For Bound Aegis, you'll now have 50% block mitigation when you activate it instead of 40%, and the duration will increase based on your combined physical and spell resistance. So 3 seconds will be the lowest it can go at 15k armor, and at 33k armor, which is typically what a tank is sitting at, you'll have a duration of 6.6 seconds. This is a slight buff from the old version for tanks. However, I don't think this is even close to the trade-off being worth it for losing the 8% max magicka. For the armaments morph, this one got a little better deal in return for the lost stamina. It now gives Prophecy and Savagery on both bars, similar to Grim Focus, and it also had its base chance to trigger the Sundered status effect increased to 15%. This is a pretty nice buff to the damage for it. It's still a worse version of Grim Focus, but not by as big of a margin as it used to be. In the Dark Magic line, Dark Steel got its minor force removed. Unfortunately, this was not replaced anywhere else in the kit, so Sorks just took a hit on this one. I did cover this change and a lot of other Sork changes a lot more in depth in my Sork feedback video. I'll have it linked below if you want to check that one out. The Blood Magic passive did receive a buff where if you're at full health, it now increases the higher of your max magicka or stamina by 10% for 10 seconds. So while I'm not opposed to buffing one of the worst PvE lines in the game, it's still nowhere even close to making the skill line worth taking. For the Arcanist, the class mastery was changed with the way it interacts with the Banner Bearer skill. It no longer generates a free crux every 5 seconds, but instead it only generates a crux if there were none, and 3 ultimate if the effect did not generate a crux. So the problem with this is that when it does activate and give you crux, it essentially cancels out your Tome Bearer skill, making that ineffective. Or if Tome Bearer does generate the crux already and this one gives you ultimate, that happens some of the time, so your total ult gain is not very high from this. Even if it was 3 every 5 seconds, that would be okay, but still probably one I wouldn't take under most circumstances. I don't really like the design of how it currently works, and we are back to flailing twice between each beam phase. This mastery is just really not worth using anymore though. You're better off using a different class as the base, or using Cavalier's Charge if you're going to stick with the Arcanist. Then for class passives that generate ultimate, if you have multiple class lines equipped with ultimate generation, those cooldowns will now be shared. It isn't really a huge deal, but it is another nerf for specialized setups here. The Catalyst passive in the Siphoning line was not included in this shared cooldown, but the ultimate generated was reduced to 22, down from 30 every time you drink a potion. And somehow these were the only changes they made for class balance in Update 47. To be blunt, this is just unacceptable. Not only the nerfs to power 2 months after we got it, but but none of the underperforming lines were buffed up to be worth using. So we're pretty much in the same exact spot as we were before, just with less damage and less fun rotations. How exciting. But don't worry, we still have some nerfs for non-class abilities to cover too. For Barrier, the replenishing morph no longer grants ultimate. They instead increased the Magicka restore. Really boring change here. If they don't want ultimate on it, at least put something more exciting than that. For Meteor, the Shooting Star morph now costs 185 instead of 200, but only grants 10 ultimate per enemy hit instead of 12, and can work on a maximum of 6 targets. Another bad change here. I don't understand why ZOS wants to get rid of interesting interactions with skills like this. Seems like we should be striving for more unique interactions with abilities, not less. But that's it for the skills. Let's move on to the item set changes. Most of the changes here are quite a bit better than the ability changes. We've updated many stack-based sets to grant a portion of their bonuses up front with no conditional requirements or grant more bonus per stack while reducing their maximum stacks. This is in an effort to ensure they offer more consistent power bonuses. This also means some have seen an overall reduction in power in efforts to reduce their ability to outshine other sets in gameplay. This is a case-by-case point, however, where many sets have been generally buffed. We'll start off with Highland Sentinel. This now only has 3 stacks rather than 10, but each stack is worth 443 instead of 357, and you automatically get 986 crit at all times while the 5-piece bonus is active. So to use numbers that actually make sense instead of the weird ZOS numbers, the old version had about 9% crit chance without stacks, and then about 25% crit chance total after 10 seconds of building up stacks. The new version has 13.5% crit chance without any stacks, and about 19.5% crit chance after 3 seconds of building up stacks. So the top end has definitely come down, but the stacks are much easier to build up now as you only need 3 seconds to reach the max amount, and when you move, you only lose 1 stack instead of half of all your stacks. So this set is definitely way more usable in a variety of encounters than it used to be, but for scenarios where Highland was good before, you are losing about 5.5% crit chance from that old version. Still a very good set though. I don't love the change here, but I don't mind it either. Berserking Warrior had a similar set of changes as well. It now offers all crit chance for the 2 to 4 piece bonuses and has the 4.5% crit chance active at all times while the 5 piece bonus is active, so 13.5% at all times before you build any stacks. It also only stacks up 5 times now instead of 10, allowing you to build it up much more quickly, and actually ends up slightly higher on the 5 piece than before at 11.3% crit chance instead of 11. In total, this set sits just slightly ahead of Highland Sentinel at 20.3% crit chance. Really strong set, but it does have the drawback of being heavy armor, so if you are wearing a mythic on your jewels, you will be forced into 1 heavy body piece, negating its advantage over Highland Sentinel. Still going to be a very good option for a number of setups though, especially with biting jabs or flurry builds, as those can build up to max stacks in about 2.5 to 3 seconds. Mantle of Sororia was a recipient of these changes. It now gives 200 weapon and spell damage at all times while the 5 piece is active, and then stacks up to 640 instead of the 630 that it had before. Harmony and Chaos is in a similar boat, 200 weapon and spell damage at all times, and then it can stack up to 640 total, down from the 675 that it was at before. However, there is a bit more wiggle room with keeping it up, as the stacks last for 15 seconds now instead of 10 seconds. Twice Fanged Serpent now gives 2305 penetration at all times on the 5 piece bonus and stacks up to 5605 and just 5 stacks, up from the 5440 that took 10 stacks before. So penetration is not usually well suited for a 5 piece bonus for PvE, but it will stack up a lot faster now in 2.5 seconds instead of 5. They also changed the 3 piece bonus to penetration instead of max stamina. I think this could actually be a really nice PvP set. Then we have Yondir's Might. The perfected bonus was changed to weapon and spell damage instead of penetration. It also only takes 5 stacks to build up, meaning you can get there in about 2.5 seconds instead of 5 seconds. It was also slightly buffed to 430 at max stacks, up from 410. And then when you do a fully charged heavy attack, you now jump up to 680 for 15 seconds, up from 630. I really like the changes here. I've always liked Yondir. In the past, I've enjoyed using it on fights that had phases where I can deal damage, but the boss is not active. So I can sit at my max stacks and wait for the boss to be able to be hit again. And then I can line my heavy up perfectly there and get the high amount of weapon and spell damage for 15 seconds without taking up an extra GCD with the heavy attack during combat. I still think it's not quite enough to be competitive with some other options, but it's certainly in a better spot than it was before. Next we have Coral Riptide. This was nerfed to 600 weapon and spell damage, down from 740. However, you only need to get to 50% stamina to max it out rather than 33%. So up until about 45% stamina, the new version is actually stronger, and then at that point, the old version passes it up. I think this is pretty fair, to be honest. It can be stacked up before an encounter, which a lot of these other sets cannot. It also has a couple of crit chance lines on it too, which the other weapon and spell damage sets are missing. Besides Mania got a similar treatment here too. It goes up to 10% now instead of the 12%, but it maxes out at 50% magicka remaining instead of 0. This makes it far, far better than the old version up until that 50% mark. And then the old version starts catching up at that point and passes it about 16% magicka remaining. I very much prefer this new version, and I think it's a pretty strong buff to the set overall for most players. Caspian's was given a very nice buff. They increased the sword damage, but the part that's really good is that 2% buff you get per sword is now on a 6-second timer that can refresh and stacks up to 12%. So on multi-target fights, as long as you keep doing AoE direct damage, you can keep up that 12% damage buff at all times. That should make this a best in slot set for a number of encounters in the game. Destructive Mage was buffed a bit. I don't see it being super competitive with some other heavy attack options, but it does have a very decent size AoE at 8 meters, so it could be fun on some more casual heavy attack builds. Dolores Arena was changed to 5 seconds for the stacks, up from 2 seconds, so you have a little more wiggle room to drop block and maintain the armor buff and debuff. Roaring Opportunist had the 2-piece bonus changed from penetration to weapon and spell damage. A nice change considering what the requirements are on the 5-piece bonus and the fact that this is mostly used by healers. Arms of Reliquant got a slight nerf of 2%. Thought this was a little weird. Still wish they changed the pin line to weapon and spell damage or a crit chance there, but I think Reliquant would be pretty decent if dot builds were actually a thing and people were running Thaumaturge, but alas, we're not, so it's kind of not really being used too much at the moment. Whirl of the Depths was buffed by about 3%, already a pretty solid set. Doesn't make too much difference, but hey, I won't argue with the buff here. And then finally, we got the Mythic set, Rakat's Void Mantle. Fixed an issue where this set's damage done bonus to heavy attacks did not operate as other damage done bonuses, resulting in it being much higher than intended in certain cases. The heavy attack damage bonus no longer works with Overload, as Overload's heavy attacks do not exhibit the penalty of this set. The restore from this set is now treated as a heavy attack restore, so it can be augmented by more effects. So I've already ranted about this enough in previous videos, but I really hate this direction that ZOS goes, taking unique interactions and removing them. Their reasoning is just very anti-player as well. I do hope they can figure out a better solution for this in the future. Alright, so that sums up the item set changes. Now I just wanted to go through a few of my Update 46 builds and talk about how these changes will be affecting them. I won't cover all of the builds here, but the principles that we talk about can be applied across the board. First off, the most impacted setups will be the Fate Carver builds using the Banner and Relentless Focus. I did a few parses on Update 47 with the Adric Tome setup to get a comparison, so these principles that we'll go over apply to pretty much all the beam builds, but I'm going to use this specific one as an example. In Update 46, this setup was at 161k DPS. I used Narayanith with Null Arca, along with 2 arena sets. So now with the same setup in Update 47, we've dropped down to 146k. This is roughly a 10% DPS loss, pretty massive nerf. I did almost the same exact setup. We adjusted Banner to Intellect and Endurance for the extra sustain, since we already have the Savagery and Prophecy from Relentless Focus. For content, there's a lot of good options depending on what you're doing, like Minor Cowardice or Minor Berserk, but I didn't want to change anything else here because I wanted a good baseline to work from. So we do have to flail twice now between each beam phase instead of usually only needing to once. Definitely made the rotation feel more clunky, and stuff didn't line up as well overall as it did in the last patch. I just wasn't really having a whole lot of fun testing it out. Now, I'm not necessarily recommending this setup. I just wanted to get a baseline test with the same build as last patch, including the revamped Arcanist class mastery on the Banner, which ended up being pretty much worthless on this test since I did not gain enough ultimate to cast an extra one in the parse. However, with some basic adjustments, we can make some of this DPS loss back up. So here in this setup, I swapped to Templar as the base class and used their class mastery instead, and it brought me up to 150k DPS. If you want to stay on Arcanist with this setup, you definitely can. You'll just change to the Cavalier's Charge instead of the class mastery for the signature script on the Banner. This will give you the same 150 weapon and spell damage as the Templar class mastery. You just won't get that extra armor buff that the Templar one gives you. For Cavalier's Charge, in order to get to that 150, you will need the Celerity Celerity champion point node slotted, along with the minor expedition buff. To get the expedition, you'll drop Relentless Focus and put Concealed Weapon on your back bar, and then you'll need to change your banner affix back to Prophecy and Savagery. Now you will get a little bit of major expedition as well if you're running Quick Cloak, but it only lasts for 4 seconds out of every 30 seconds or so that you cast it, so it's not going to make much difference. Personally, I think I'd rather have the consistent armor throughout, but maybe if someone in the group is providing major expedition, it could lean more towards that one. So this setup with Cavalier's Charge should get you pretty similar stats. You just won't have the flexibility with your banner to run something other than Prophecy and Savagery unless you slot Camo Hunter on the front bar, which you absolutely can do. I just like the Templar class mastery a little better because you have a little more skill bar flexibility. The Dragonite one is also pretty good. If you have 3 targets, it matches the 150, and at 6 targets, it goes up to 300 weapon and spell damage. For single target, it's a good bit worse, but for AoE, it's better, and it adds in a nice bit of defense that increases based on the targets around you too. I also tried this same skill loadout with the Highland Sentinel setup, and it performed slightly worse than the Narayanith loadout. I thought this might be the case with them performing pretty close to each other before, and now Highland Sentinel getting nerfed. So Highland should still be nice on setups that aren't using Assassination, since our crit chance will be much lower. I did compare it up against Deadly Strike here, using that instead of Highland. I got about the same results, so don't really think there's much reason to run Highland with Assassination on a beam build. And then same as last patch, you can slot an Adric Spear ability on the front bar to get the extra crit damage if you're under the cap. Definitely recommend doing that for content if you need to. And then here we have the Beam Machine build. This is the same skill setup as last patch, except with the Templar class mastery now. Obviously the numbers here are still respectable, especially compared to update 45, but quite a bit of a damage loss compared to update 46, since that one was at about 160k for me. Now I've seen some people just dropping Assassination altogether. I think it'll be great for some encounters. The passives are still really good even without the 400 weapon and spell damage from Relentless Focus. You still get a lot of crit chance and crit damage. It's also great sustain for encounters with a lot of adds through the Executioner passive. But Ardent Flame seems like a nice replacement for it if you do want to drop it. With this setup here, we got 151k. I have Flames of Oblivion on the front bar and Venomous Claw on the back bar. You can swap those based on your preferences. I found the results were pretty similar doing that either way. For content, I'd likely drop Dawnbreaker for Everlasting Sweep, the Adric Spear ultimate, so I'd have that extra crit damage from my passives. And then Whip is just on the back bar to passively give weapon and spell damage, similar to what Relentless Focus was doing before. Now the big downside to this setup is that it greatly relies on Standard of Might to achieve these levels of damage, and some fights are a bit too mobile to make great use of that ultimate, so I think it'll definitely be situational depending on the encounter which combo is going to work best. Another thing worth mentioning with the nerfs to the Arcanist banner, the new replacement signature options are definitely worth running if no one in your group has it going. But if someone else already has a banner going in your group, it is likely that you could get higher results swapping to a non-banner setups, and your sustain will be better too. So I only got slightly less damage here at 150k without the banner, but assuming someone else in my group is buffing me with the banner, that would push it up ahead of the other version. Could also drop Barb Trap here as well for Camo Hunter if you need better minor berserk uptime. You can drop Dawnbreaker for Everlasting Sweep to activate the Adric Spear passive. There's a decent bit of flexibility here without the banner taking up 2 slots. This next setup, I liked this one pretty well too. Performed similarly to the Assassination version. This is using Adric and Dawn's Wrath together with Herald of the Tome, but this one would only be doable on a Templar based class since we're using 2 Templar lines here. Again, for content, you can run Everlasting Sweep instead of Dawnbreaker if you need that extra crit damage. So overall for beam builds, there is a bit of flexibility to drop Assassination now, but I still think it's a great option if you want to keep it. I think I'll use it for quite a few encounters in the game still. The nerf sucks, but it doesn't feel nearly as bad to me as the banner change. Having to do 2 flails for each beam just feels so much worse as a rotation than the single flail did. One of those cases where you don't know how good it is until it's gone. All right, so what about non-beam builds? Well, for setups such as Adric Corruption here that you were slotting Relentless Focus on the back bar, it's a pretty similar situation. If you need the buff from it, you could just leave it there to activate your Prophecy and Savagery and also unlock your Nightblade passives while you're on the back bar. Or you could swap it to something like Concealed Weapon to get that 15% movement speed bonus with Minor Expedition if you don't need the Prophecy and Savagery. For builds like Burning Light here that run it on the front bar as an active cast, you can pretty much leave leave the build as is, you'll just have less weapon and spell damage than before. Depending on your sustain needs, Relentless Focus is also a really good option now for the active, since you can fire it at 4 stacks instead of 5, meaning you could fire 3 in a row during an off balance window, or really whenever during a fight. So Relentless seems like it's a little more damage over a sustained fight than Merciless now, but they should be very close. So just pick the one that best fits your sustain needs. Then the same would go for this setup here with the Radiant Flame setup. The active on Grim Focus is just really good for firing off. Then for setups like the AAA here, this one had Savagery and Prophecy on the banner. So now you can take that off for a different buff, since Merciless or Relentless will cover that for you. And then for builds that are using bound armaments as a back bar buff, it likely won't be worth it that way anymore, just for the Savagery and Prophecy. Could be, I mean, if you really need the buff, you could do that, but it should be a very good active cast ability now. So if you can fit it on the front bar, it got quite a nice buff with the extra sunder damage that it'll deal now. And if you're looking for any of these setups, you can find them all on my website at skinnycheeks.gg. So those are the main changes based on combat balance adjustments. Again, this didn't cover every build, but these principles can be applied across the board. With regard to gear set changes, I do think there will be a little bit more set diversity now for content, especially with the big buff to Caspian. I can see that one getting used on AoE fights a bit more for sure. Highland and Berserking might also be used in a few more spots than they were before, but for the most part, gearing will look pretty similar to Update 46. So overall, I like the new additions to the game, but I feel like the combat changes in Update 47 were really half-baked. I would have preferred to just have another few months of no combat changes at all and give them more time to make proper adjustments, rather than the mess that we have to adjust to now after only a couple of months of getting to enjoy the current builds. I think that's what a lot of people are frustrated about. It's such a quick turnaround. We just got the builds that we're working with, and now we already have to change them up just 2 months later. It's just way too short of a time frame to be changing this up. And if it was changing for the better, if a lot of underperforming skill lines were being bumped up, I don't think people would mind that as much. But when we're not really getting fun, cool new builds out of these changes, then it just feels really bad. But what do you all think about the changes here in Update 47? You think it's better than I'm giving it credit for? Leave a comment down below. Let me know your thoughts on the update. That's going to do it for this one. Thank you guys so much for watching. Big shout out to my Patreon and YouTube members. I really appreciate the support. And a special thanks to these folks here. I couldn't keep doing this without you. I'll see y'all in the next one. Bye.